Thanks for joining Anne and I for this month's webinar. Today the focus is on bin tracking for Sage 300. Bin tracking lets you track inventory across multiple bins within Sage 300 inventory locations. It is part of the Operations and Inventory Management suite of Orchid products. You're all in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions, please put them in the questions box. As usual, we will send you a link to the recording of the webinar in the next few days, so you don't need to take notes. We will play a 45-minute video presenting bin tracking, and then we will come back for questions. So without further ado, I'm switching to the video. We'll cover a quick start for bin tracking. We'll demonstrate examples of using bin tracking, including Stocktake procedures, and we will also show you how to use bin tracking with other modules, Orchid modules, and other third-party modules. Bin tracking lets you track inventory across multiple bins within Sage 300 inventory locations. It is part of the Operations and Inventory Management suite of Orchid products and is often used in conjunction with RMA, Return Material Authorization. It helps increase your warehouse efficiency because your staff know exactly where to store and find any items. You have configurable options for optimizing the pick and the put away. All movements are tracked by bin transfer documents, so it's good for auditing purposes. It supports handheld scanning devices through integration with other third-party modules. All bin information is stored in Sage 300. You don't need a separate warehouse management system just to track multiple bins, and therefore you don't need to reconcile multiple databases. Other general benefits of using bin tracking is you would have faster turnaround and reduce handling costs. You have a more accurate inventory records, which means fewer items are lost or misplaced, and your customers are more satisfied through faster shipping and fewer rejected orders. So today we will present a 20-minute quick start video to get going with bin tracking. It allows you to create your bins per IC location. You configure how to track the items per IC stock movement. You define your rules for auto bin allocation. You can use optional fields in the bin transfer header, and also in the bin transfer details. Bin tracking supports lot tracking and serial number. It supports your physical inventory by location and your cycle count by bin. And there are also a lot of inquiry screens and reports. We will show you how to use bin tracking in some core Sage 300 screens that generate IC stock movement, like a PO receipt and an OE shipment. We will present two options for Stocktakes, and we will discuss the third-party modules that support scanning bins with their handheld scanning devices, show you an example of using bin tracking with RMA, and discuss how to use bin tracking with AutoSimply Manufacturing and Technisoft Service Manager. Finally, we'll also show you integration of bin tracking with other Orchid modules, such as Info Explorer, Document Management Link. The first part is a quick start to configure bin tracking, and for this I will hand over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Natalie. In this quick start bin tracking video, we're going to download, install and activate bin tracking, enter our license code, configure our options, create the bins, and then take our stock on. And we're going to discuss the two different methods that you can use to take your stock on. To download bin tracking, go to orchid.systems, log in, and then in the product download area, select the version you're after, in our case 2022, and then download the module. And after downloading, you can go to install the module. Since mid-2021, all our supported modules only prompt you for the serial number and activation code when you activate the module in a company database. And then open the Sage 300 company which you want to activate bin tracking in. Go to Admin Services, Data Activation, and select bin tracking. If you are activating in a company for the first time on this site, you will now need to go and enter your serial number and activation code. If you have this option in IC turned on to delete the history during posting, it is advised you turn this off, as bin tracking maintains its history from the IC history. To turn it off, go to IC Setup Options and deselect this option. Prompt to delete during posting. And then in bin tracking, go and enter your license. If you are activating for 30 days, you can just click Save after keying your serial number. If you have your activation code, you can key it in now too. And if your details are correct, you are prompted to relog on to get your icons. For the bin tracking setup, you need to configure your options, assign optional fields that you want to use at the bins, bin transfer header or bin transfer detail level, create your bins, and then in admin services, assign your security groups for bin tracking. There are also visual process flows if you want to use the bin tracking visual process flows. A visual process flow for the Stocktake and a visual process flow for recording transactions. In the options, for each of the IC, OE and PO transactions that create a stock movement, you need to configure the way you want the bin transfer document to work. In this case, for your IC receipt, do you want the bin transfer document to be automatically created during posting of the IC receipt, or only created automatically if there are items with bins on the IC receipt, or will it be created manually? And then you need to say for this particular document, do you want the status to be not ready, or do you want it to default to being ready for pick and put away? The status defines the color red or orange on the pick status screen. This is an IC receipt, so it's a put away. How do you want the bin to be allocated? Manually, or do you want it to be auto put away, or auto put away and the document automatically completed? And if you are doing auto put away, what are the rules? Is it the last bin you picked from, the last bin put away to, or the bin setup order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where 1 would be preferred to 2, 3, 4, 5. And when you're recording and posting the source transaction, do you want the bin transfer document to pop up automatically? Yes or no? And do you want the document to be auto completed? Yes or no? And if there are non-stock items on your source transaction, do you want them on the bin transfer? Yes or no? And normally you'd set all your put away type records the same and your shipment or pick type records the same. And just as we could set the rules for the put away, we can set the rules for the pick type documents, auto pick or manual or auto pick and complete. And if you are auto picking, what is the basis for the auto picking based on your most recent put away, or your least recent put away, or your bin setup pick order 1, 2, 3, 4, where 1 would be preferred to 2, 3, or 4. Do you want the bin transfer document to pop up when you are posting the document, the source document? And do you want it to auto complete if all the bins are filled in? And normally you would have the same rules for all your pick documents. So the IC shipment, OE shipment, assembly for the raw materials, they're picked. And the same rules for your putaways, IC receipts, PO receipts, and your assemblies to put away the finished goods. On the Processing tab, you define your document length, whether or not you allow negative quantities, whether or not you allow the bin transfer document to be completed when the quantities don't match the source document. You can elect to have a filter or a mask for those items which you do or don't want to bin track. So you may want to ignore all promotional materials. And then you go ahead and create your bins. Per IC location, you define whether or not you're going to bin track that location. So we are going to bin track location 1, and then you enter your bin codes. The bin number can be up to 10 characters long, have a description. You can define whether it's active or not, a temporary bin or not, whether you allow all items or only the specified items below in that bin. If you are picking by pick order or put away by put away order, you can define what the pick order is and the put away order, whether or not you allow receiving into this bin, picking from this bin, and if you want, you can specify a quick bin code instead of having to key the full bin number and define your optional fields. You can export this example bin code for location 1 as an example and then use Excel to create the bins, all the bins required for all the locations, and then import that resulting spreadsheet. We can open up that spreadsheet, turn on bin tracking for locations 1, 2, 3, 4, create all the bin codes for all the locations, location 1, location 2, and so on. And then import the bin codes. Location 2, 3, 4, and of course 1. We have seen how to download, install, and activate bin tracking, entering our serial number and activation code, and we've configured the options and created our bins. Now we need to think about taking on our opening stock balances. And this will be different depending on whether IC has been live for some time and you're now taking on bin tracking, or if you're taking on IC and bin tracking at the same time. First, we'll look at taking on bin tracking at the same time as IC. Here you would enter the IC transaction for the take on balances. This might be an IC receipt, a PO receipt, or an IC adjustment. And when this document is posted in ICPO, bin tracking will automatically create the bin transfer document to support that transaction. It'll have all the items on, plus all the quantities on, and then you can go ahead and enter the bins. Here we're going to create an IC receipt to record our initial stock take on. And when we go ahead and post that receipt, bin tracking will have created a bin transfer document accordingly. And when we open this up, and we can go ahead and fill in the appropriate bin. The reason the bins weren't auto-allocated is because I had set to auto-allocate our put-away bin based on the last bin the item was picked from, and we haven't yet picked any items. So the initial put-away needs to be manual. And if this quantity is to be put in multiple bins, we can specify multiple bins here. So this might be a quantity of 50. and 50 in bin A010102. When bin tracking recognizes the quantity is fully put away, it suggests you want to complete it, which I can go ahead and say yes, and in which case that document will drop off this status screen next time it is refreshed. We have just seen how you can take on your bin count when you are taking on your quantities per item per bin at the same time as you're taking on your quantities per IC location. We did an example looking at an IC receipt. But if your IC is already live and you have balances in your IC, there's two ways you can take on your opening bin stock take. You can either do an IC stock take. Bin tracking will generate a workbook automatically to match the stock take. You can enter the quantities per bin and then post the bin reconciliation, which will create a bin transfer to support the increases in your stock levels per bin. And then you can just delete the IC workbook because you're not actually going to use that to adjust your IC stock. Or you can create a bin transfer document. Do not link it to any source document in ICOE or PO, and just do a put away for all your item quantities / bins. And this is what I'm going to give you an example of now. There are other videos on our website of doing an IC stock take, so have a look at those if you want to see how that process works. To get my opening stock levels, I'm going to use a template in my location details to export the current stock levels. And then massage these details onto one of the take-on sample templates that you'll find in the Import Templates folder. And I'm going to use this sample template for putaways. And you paste your details on this tab here, the Transfer Details tab. And then go to your bin transfer document and import that file. So this is your take on stock, which is not associated with any source document. And you can complete the document. After taking on the data, in the item and bin inquiry, you will have all your stock levels with the stock quantities per item, per bin, per location. And we've now seen how to take on our stock balances, both at the same time as a source transaction from IC and taking on after IC has been live for some time by importing a bin transfer document that is not associated with any source transaction.
Thanks, Anne, for a quick start on getting going with bin tracking, including your take-on balances. Now that we have activated and configured bin tracking, we can start using it. First, we will use bin tracking with various Sage 300 screens that generate stock movement in OE, PO and IC. We will then present two main options for Stocktake procedures when using bin tracking. We will discuss how Info Explorer can assist when dealing with more complex Stocktake when the data may need some pre-validation before posting the Stocktake. We'll also discuss using bin tracking with third-party modules that generate stock movements, such as AutoSimply Manufacturing, Technisoft Service Manager. Over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Natalie. In the Spotlight on Bin Tracking video, we're going to have a look at using bin tracking with some of the Sage 300 screens in IC and purchase orders. And we're going to look at some tips and tricks using that. We're going to look at the Stocktake procedures, whether you start your physical inventory count based on an IC worksheet or start your physical inventory count based on a BT worksheet. And then we're going to look at using bin tracking with other third-party modules like Orchid's RMA, barcode systems, AutoSimply's manufacturing, Technisoft Service Manager, and warehouse management systems. But first, we're going to look at using your bin transfer transactions when you're recording purchase orders, order entry, or inventory control transactions. Based on your configuration settings, when you post the associated source transaction, like a PO receipt or a PO return, order entry credit note, shipment debit note, or any of the inventory control transactions, when the source document is posted, the bin transfer document can be automatically created, and if you have used a auto pick or auto put away rule, the default bin will be suggested for you. You can then fill in, confirm, or change the bin allocation, and then post and close the document. These documents can also suggest a bin and automatically close if appropriate. And that is useful, for example, if you always receive your goods into a bulk storage, you can assign the bin bulk and close the documents automatically. And depending on how you set up this pop-up bin transfer when posting the source document flag, the bin transfer document will automatically pop up or will be created and you will access it through the pick status screen. We're now going to do an OE shipment, which the document will be created, the bins will be allocated, but it won't pop up. And we're going to do a PO receipt, where the document will be created, the bins will be allocated, and the bin transfer will auto pop up. We're first going to look at purchase orders. We have this PO for these 3 items. But bin tracking will only create a bin transfer document when the PO receipt is created, because bin tracking only creates documents for movements in and out of the warehouse, and with a purchase order you do not have a movement yet of the stock items. So when we go ahead and create a receipt for that purchase order and receive all in post, it's at this point that bin tracking will create a bin transfer document associated with that receipt number for the items on the receipt and the quantities, and depending on your put away method, if it can suggest a bin, it will suggest a bin for you. So our current put away method is last bin the item was picked from, and the A11030 was last picked from this bin, and this item was last picked from this bin. But as we have not yet done a pick for the A11050, it cannot suggest to us a bin. And we need to key in or select a bin for it to be put away into. When we save, bin tracking is recognizing that all the quantities from the source documents have been fully put away, and that document is now being completed. And now we're going to have a look at a sample of a pick type document. So the bin transfer document will be created when the shipment document is created, not the order. So whether we ship all and create the shipment from this screen, or we go to the shipment screen and link it to the order and create the shipment that way, it's at the point in time that the shipment gets created that bin tracking will create the associated bin transfer document. And if we go ahead, if we want to print the picking slip and we base it on the shipment and we use the bin tracking picking slip from the shipment, the suggested bins will be on the picking slip. The bin transfer does not pop up automatically because our configuration row said no to pop up bin transfer when the shipment is created. But we can access it from the bin tracking transaction screen, the pick status screen, we can see the latest OE shipment here. And if we double click to open up the bin transfer document, we will see the 3 items, quantities, and the suggested bins. And when we go to save, again, it's going to suggest, do you want to complete the document because it's fully picked? If we say yes, the status will go to complete and it will drop off our picking status screen next time we refresh. We have now seen the effect of some of the bin tracking setup options when we recorded our PO receipt and our OE shipment, and the different effect it had on the auto-generated bin transfer document. And there are more training videos on our website to see more details on the other options. We're now going to have a look at stock takes using bin tracking. When you're using bin tracking, there are 2 ways you can do your stock take. One, where you start with the IC generate IC inventory worksheet, or if you only want to count a range of bins, then you can start using the generate BT inventory worksheet. Whether you're going to start your stock take in IC or bin tracking, you should follow the following checklist. For all modules, you should complete and post all your open transactions in IC, OE, and PO, any documents that affect stock levels. And you should remove any committed quantities and order entry and service manager if you're using that, and then you should freeze your stock processing. In IC, you should adjust all the IC quantities if any locations have negative quantities, negative costs, costs with no quantities, quantities with no costs, and then run a day end and post all the transactions. And in bin tracking, you should ensure you have no open bin transfer documents, and if you have allowed negative quantities per bin, make sure you have no negative quantities in the bins. All of these complications just make the stock take more complicated than needs be. We're now going to look at the stock take procedures inside Sage 300. Looking at the bin tracking stock take visual process flow, we can see our 2 different ways of doing our stock take. 1, starting off in IC, or 2, starting off in bin tracking. So after running your day end, if you want to do the entire location or locations, we would recommend you start in IC. You generate your IC workbook, you enter or import your inventory count by bin, print and post the bin reconciliation, which will create a bin transfer to support the up and down with respect to bins. Then it will also update your IC worksheet with the physical quantities counted. Then you go ahead and print that, check your costs, and post your inventory reconciliation. And then you can run the bin totals versus location totals, and they should be in sync if all the items are counted correctly. Or, after doing your day end, if you want to do a cycle count by bin, you could generate the BT inventory worksheet, starting from the bin tracking inventory worksheet option. Then you'd still come to enter or import your count into the bin tracking inventory count sheet, print the reconciliation and post when you're happy. And in this case, it'll create a bin transfer document to support the up and down with respect to bins, and it will create an IC adjustment with respect to any ups or downs in quantities that need to happen for IC. You would then print that IC adjustment, check your costs, post it, and then print your bin totals versus location totals report. In this instance, we're going to start in IC. So we're going to generate our IC workbook. And we're just going to do one location, select all our items, and whether or not you want to start off with the default quantity on hand or start off zero based, up to you. And when IC has finished creating the IC worksheet, bin tracking creates the corresponding worksheet for bin tracking. And I can open it here. and it will put all the items that were on the IC worksheet into the BT worksheet, and it'll include the item per bin quantities plus any cases where IC is over or under bin tracking. In this case, IC has 144 less of this item than bin tracking has. 75, 127 less. So now you need to come and specify your bins or say where these quantities are before you can complete the bin transfer. If we're happy with our quantities counted for this item in our bins, if we're happy with these two values, then we could zero out the negative quantity counted, and then when bin tracking updates IC, it'll be for the total, and therefore will increase the IC quantities. So we could do that for all our negative quantities on our bin worksheet. And for the positive quantities, this means that IC has more than bin tracking. We would either fill in the bin where we find it, or if we don't find it, zero it out, and that quantity will be written off IC when we update the IC worksheet from this bin count. And then we can adjust the quantities per bin manually, or you can import your stock count using a special program to import your stock count. You connect through to the database, and the stock worksheet needs a special format, and you can consult this knowledge base article to see what the format of your stock count needs to be. The reason why we need a specially formatted import is the standard Sage import cannot update a header detail such as the structures of the bin stock count. The header is the location, the details are the bins, and then you've got a detail of item and possibly another detail for your lots and serial numbers. And the standard file import does not support an update of an existing header detail. Before posting this Stocktake, if you are using lot tracking in your Sage 300 database and you're using Info Explorer, we have a cube in our knowledge base which allows you to validate your workbook before you try and post it. It looks for the typical errors in your workbook that IC will not allow you to post through onto an IC worksheet. This knowledge base article describes the scenarios that it works for, and you can download the cube here. I'm just going to open up that cube now. You would change the properties on the cube to point to your database and then click refresh, and it reads your current inventory worksheet, and it shows you, for example, the scenario where your lot number in the database and the lot number in the workbook have a different case. It also shows you those lots which don't exist yet in IC. So if you're updating an IC worksheet, this update will not be allowed to happen. You need to first create that lot. If you've got any lots with reserved quantities on sales orders, you can pick that up here. As IC does not allow you to write off stock if it's committed or reserved on orders. And we can also pick up if your lot cost or lot quantity is negative, which will give you issues when you're trying to post through to the IC worksheet. So it's worth validating your workbook before you try and post your workbook. Correct the errors, then refresh the cube, and only try and post when all the errors have been rectified. And once you're happy with your stock count, you could post the bin reconciliation, which would create a bin transfer for the movement of stock with respect to bins, and would update the IC physical inventory count with the write-ups and downs with respect to IC. And then in IC, you would print the IC reconciliation report to check your costs, and when you're happy, post the IC workbook and then run the report to compare your bin tracking stock levels against your IC stock levels, which should match. Alternatively, you could create the workbook by running this option, Generate BT Workbook. This allows you to select by location a range of bins if you want to. So if you do want to do a cycle count by bin number, you can, or you could select all the bins in the workbook. And now when it generates the worksheet, bin tracking knows this worksheet does not have an associated IC worksheet. You would still enter your count or import your count, and there are handheld solutions that allow you to scan your count and update the bin inventory count. And after completing your count, this time when you post the bin reconciliation, you are prompted for a reference and an IC adjustment number. And bin tracking will create a bin transfer, BT4, to support the movement of stock with respect to bin tracking, and an IC adjustment to support the movement in reference to IC stock levels. And for more explanation on all the different options with your Stocktake, please go to bin tracking, the training video. It has more details on all the different options for the Stocktake. But now in BT transactions, we have BT4, which has those adjustments that are made. And in IC, we have the IC adjustment. The quantity and cost transaction is created. You need to double check the costs and then post this adjustment when you're happy. We've seen some of the Stocktake procedures when using an IC-based Stocktake or a BT-based Stocktake. And now we're going to look at bin tracking working with other third-party modules. We're going to look at how you can configure bin tracking for Orchid's RMA. We're going to discuss some of the barcode systems and the functionality that you can use with those systems. We're going to look at AutoSimply's manufacturing, Technisoft's service manager, and other warehouse management systems too. When you activate bin tracking in a company database which also has return material authorizations activated in it, in the options, on the Pick Method tab, you will have options to configure bin tracking for a PO return that's created by RMA and for an OE credit note that's created by RMA. So you can make the PO return and the OE credit note function differently, whether it comes from an RMA or whether it comes from the base PO or OE screen. So we're going to say that it's going to automatically be created during posting. The status will be not ready. For our PO return, we're going to auto pick based on the most recent put away. And for our credit note, we're going to put away into the last bin it was picked from. And do we want the bin transfer document to pop up automatically? We'll say yes. So now if we create an RMA, and return 2 of this item, and say we need to put this item on the credit note and we're going to return the goods to inventory. When we complete the document, we can generate a credit note. And when the credit note is created, credit note 9, because we'd configured bin tracking to automatically pop up when a credit note is created from the RMA, we have the details here, and it's defaulted the bin for us. We could override that, and when we save, we'll be prompted, do you want to complete the document? And in our case, we'll say yes. Just as Notes and Document Management Link work on all Sage 300 screens, they also work on bin tracking. So you can keep track of the items within a bin, inspection, documentation, special notes against the vendors or the customers, and so on. And you can configure bin tracking to open around other screens, for example, your own custom screen or the PJC screen, any of these screens which create one of the core ICOE PO transactions in the background which have a stock movement. You can insert a row into the UI file to, in this case, enable the bin transfer for the IC shipment that is created by PJC material usage. And you can do the same thing, configure the ACPAC UI file to include all the different auto-simply manufacturing transactions that create IC adjustments or IC shipments. So you can configure which auto-simply screens the bin transfer document will auto pop up around. And when you have Service Manager installed, Service Manager automatically installs the UI file for you so that bin tracking can pop up at the appropriate place for the Service Manager issues or invoicing or crediting. And you can configure the allocation of the bins, whether the screen pops up automatically and whether it completes automatically in the same way as you can for all the core modules, shipments, receipts. And also on our website, on the bin tracking page, we list a number of third-party modules that integrate with bin tracking. We have discussed AutoSimply Manufacturing and Technisoft, Service Manager, but AutoSimply also have a barcode operations module which allows you to create shipments, do receipts, and also do stock counts on handheld devices. So does AccuDart have a very similar functionality. EDI Soft allows you order fulfillment, and WMS Soft allows you warehouse management systems, all integrating with bin tracking. And that concludes my side of the webinar in showing you different things you can do using bin tracking. Back to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Anne, for demonstrating how to use bin tracking, including Stocktake procedures. So we haven't demonstrated all the examples, but bin tracking can work in conjunction with other Orchid modules very well. We've looked at using Info Explorer for analysis and exception criteria, in particular in the example of supporting Stocktake. There's also some sample cubes on the Orchid website to analyze bin tracking documents. We can use Document Management Link to document the bin setup, the bin transfer documents, and also all the underlying transactions that are linked to bin transfer. We've also looked at notes relating to bins and items in bins, which can facilitate collaboration between team members. We've looked at an example of using RMA with bin tracking where the bin transfer document is created when you return some stock to inventory through RMA. An RMA, Return Material Authorization, gives you more control over your returns process. Finally, it's hard to talk about Orchid modules without talking about Extender to help improve your processes. And examples of scripts that we've written for bin tracking include scripts to do some bin transfer from bin to bin, and also to do some stock transfers narrowed by particular bins. Thank you for your time today, and for more information on bin tracking you can go to the Orchid website, look at the bin tracking page. There are some detailed training videos on the various examples we've looked at today, and also you have access to the knowledge base and to the online help for bin tracking. And now we're ready for Q&A. Okay, so as you know, you're all in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please put them in the questions box. And while you're thinking of your questions, I will make Anne the presenter so that she can answer questions.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so question number 1 is, does bin tracking support serial number and lot tracking?
Yes, it does. So similar to the IC PO and OE method on your bin transfer document. Let's just pick up this one here. When you're filling in the item, what bin it's going to and the quantity that you're putting away, if this was a serial or lot tracked or both item, when you click on this little info button or more info button, then it will prompt you for the associated serial number per quantity, or lot number and how much of each lot that you're picking per each bin.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, how can we deactivate bins that we don't use anymore?
You cannot delete bins when they're no longer in use, because the bins are referred to on the bin transfer history, and you will end up with with bin tracking data integrity errors. But you can make a bin inactive. If a bin is inactive, then it won't be displayed on the item and bin inquiry screen. So you can, I'll just close this. On your item and bin inquiry screen, this only shows active bins. So if the reason you're wanting to delete the bin is to keep your bin inquiry smaller, so there's only active bins on this inquiry, then that's the way to do it. If you've got a rule and a reason why you want to deactivate a lot of bins, you can use the periodic processing deactivate empty bins. This allows you by location or across all locations, by bin range or all bin ranges, to set a bin inactive. And the reason it would do that is if there's no current quantity of any items in the bin. And you can include or exclude temporary bins as well. So that's what I would do if you had a lot of bins which were empty and you wanted to make them inactive. But the other part of that question might be relating to the making an item per bin inactive. So this, you don't need to fill in item numbers here. As and when you put an item in a bin, it will appear down here. And when you do a Stocktake and you say include all items that are active in a bin, then it will include all these items that have ever appeared in a bin, whether or not the level is 0. So you may want to delete items from this list if they are 0, especially if you use any item in any bin. This list will build up. So your Stocktake would be a lot of items in bins which is 0, which is a bit frustrating to work through at the time of doing a Stocktake. So you may want to delete any item that is zero quantity from within the bin. And that at this stage is a manual exercise. You have to come here and go delete, delete, delete. We have done some special customized deletions of the items within a bin for some customers, so using Extender. So they had some special rules, like if it hasn't been moved in or out, there's been no activity in that bin more than 3 months ago, then only then delete the record. So speak to us if you do need that sort of maintenance. We can do it using Extender.
Thank you. Next question actually goes back to the bin inquiry screen. Can you show us how we can do some inquiries on the bin inquiry?
So the bin inquiry screen allows you to see across locations or within one location all the items in all the bins. But, and what I didn't remember from yesterday, I filtered this screen. So whenever you filter a screen in bin tracking, it remembers the filter that you have set when you close the screen. So this is by user. So at the moment, I am looking at only all the items in this in location 1 only, and where the unit of measure is the quantity in the stocking unit of measure is greater than 0. So let me just clear that filter. So to do that, I'm doing Control F and clicking clear the filter. So you can, and all the screens will prompt you when you can use the filter. So you can click on any column and filter. So if I wanted to see everywhere where the A11030 is, I can go Control F and then filter where the item number equals A11030. So now I'm seeing that this item is in all these bins. These are the quantities. That's the IC quantity, but this is the quantity per bin. And if I was only working in location 1, then maybe I would want to go Control F and say where location equals 1. So you can see the filter is building up here. But you can also filter on columns which aren't visible. So you could say, go and filter not only where location equals 1 and the item equals A11030, but where the lot quantity is something or has lot numbers, something like that. And remember, it's remembered per user, per screen. So when I come in tomorrow, for example, I'm filtering. So, or if you're not seeing what you think you should be seeing, just check you haven't got a current filter active on the screens. And this applies to a bin transfer document or your Stocktake. I think I showed you filtering in the Stocktake if you want to check the quantities across items or across bins.
Okay, thank you. Next question is when you create transactions like OE shipments or IC adjustments or manufacturing receipts using VB program or using external scripts, does it still create the bin tracking documents?
Yes, as long as you're using the SDK to create the transactions. So if you've got your own custom screen that creates a manufacturing receipt or it creates an OE shipment, as long as you've got your, as long as you're creating that through the views, bin tracking subclasses, in this case, the OE shipment view, and whenever it is created, as long as it's created through the views and when it is posted, then bin tracking will automatically create the bin transfer during posting. So this needs to be set to during posting, not manually. Set to during posting, and then it'll follow the rules that you've set for that particular document. If you've got your own custom screen that creates OE shipments, you can still configure the ACPAC UI screen for any file for bin tracking and configure your own screen so it appears in here. So you'll be able to pop up as well around your own screen if appropriate. Otherwise, if you don't need a pop-up, then it'll just behave as the rules happen for the shipment, but the pop-up only refers to the OE shipment screen. and in this case the debit note screen. So you need to configure if you need it to pop up around another custom screen.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, and that question relates to Info Explorer. You showed us a cube to help with exceptions around the Stocktake. Do you also have cubes for to analyze bin tracking documents?
Yes, we do. So I should have closed this. This is from yesterday. If you open Info Explorer and go to download our sample cubes, it'll take you to our website and you can filter by module to see what sample cubes we have. For example, bin tracking, we have 2 cubes. The bin tracking status, so this shows you the bin transfers by status, ready, not ready, in progress, and complete. And this one shows all the open bin transfers. So let's take a look at this one. So you can go to these to our demo cubes and download them. And then all you need to do is on the properties, you would link it through to your own database. So SQL user ID and password, SQL server and database, test the connection and save, and then refresh. And you would have this this dashboard, which is showing us all the bin transfers which are not ready to pick or put away, which ones are ready. The not ready pick or put away, I'm not quite sure why we've got 2 there. And it seems I've doubled up my dashboard, and these are pick and put away are in progress. And we also have those individual views showing us one by one. We're using color coding to show us not ready, ready, and in progress, and the quantities for that particular document. You do have the source document, both the bin transfer document, and in this case, it's a receipt. And when you right-hand mouse button, you'll be able to drill through to the bin transfer document.
Okay, thank you. Can't see any more questions. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions later on, you can contact us on support@orchid.systems. As I've mentioned before, you will receive a recording of the webinar in the next couple of days. And we'll be back next month for a webinar. We haven't finalized the topic just yet. And you can follow us on Twitter or on LinkedIn to get more details about the next webinar. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for your time, and we'll speak to you next month. Bye.
Bye.